Welcome back, students. This is Module 2.4.6, the carbon cycle. The global carbon cycle is one of the biogeochemical cycles that we introduced to you in the ecology topic. It describes how carbon circulates through the ecosystems on Earth. Certainly in the atmosphere, carbon is present as carbon dioxide. In the oceans, carbon dioxide can be dissolved in an aquatic medium as well, in water. There's calcium carbonate in rocks, and then there are concentrations of carbon in living things. And so those are really four reservoirs or four pools of carbon, and carbon moves between them often in the form of carbon dioxide, not always. But if you will recall the two summary equations of cellular respiration and photosynthesis, both of them had carbon dioxide in them. You'll recall perhaps that cellular respiration releases carbon dioxide while photosynthesis consumes or uses carbon dioxide. Often when we're talking about the carbon cycle, we will say that carbon is sequestered, and carbon dioxide serves to sequester carbon. And in the past, of a history of life on Earth, photosynthesis and respiration almost balanced out the flow of carbon through the biosphere. On balance, a bit more photosynthesis occurred, especially in those warm periods of the history of the Earth, where latitudes as high as England saw almost swampy, warm conditions with year-round photosynthesis. And so as a consequence of this additional photosynthesis, some plants and animals were buried. This forms a material called peat, and under continued pressure, it can lead to the formation of fossil fuels. And the three main fossil fuels are coal, petroleum, and natural gas. So this, the global carbon cycle, as I said, is based largely on carbon dioxide. And terrestrial and aquatic producers, what would those be? Those would be photosynthesizing organisms, photoautotrophs. They remove carbon dioxide and use photosynthesis to convert it to organic molecules like glucose and starch and cellulose, especially cellulose. Then producers, consumers, and decomposers break down the glucose or whatever carbon compounds have been formed through this process of aerobic respiration and convert it back to carbon dioxide to be used again by producers. I should also note here, I don't want to give a false impression, I fear that I might be, and that is that plants themselves undergo the process of aerobic respiration, and so they themselves produce carbon dioxide, but they photosynthesize more on balance. Some carbons, such as fossil fuels, takes longer to recycle because it is buried. It must be extracted and burned to release the carbon dioxide that's in there. So this background knowledge, if you look at this picture, this is the left hand of a two-frame picture of the carbon cycle, and we can see these might be white cliffs with calcium carbonate in them, but certainly in the atmosphere there is carbon dioxide, and it dissolves in the ocean water. Some of that carbon dioxide in ocean water can be used by plankton and algae to photosynthesize. So we have photosynthesis and aerobic respiration. The respiration of those algae and also of the consumers, the heterotrophs, will put carbon dioxide into the air. But of course, all the marine food webs are involved in these two processes. Of course, when organisms die, their bodies will often sink to the bottom, depending upon the decomposers, whether or not they get them before that happens. And they can be incorporated into marine sediments that include fossil fuels. It can also include things like calcium carbonate. And so uplifting over geological time, we could see like these cliffs here. If you've ever heard of the White Cliffs of Dover, the south coast of England, that has the calcium carbonate from many marine organisms. Here's the second half of this carbon cycle illustration. Notice they show combustion of fossil fuels. The previous slide actually showed a car, but there's also we can have a natural forest fire that burns and releases stored or sequestered carbon into the air, and you get the idea. And of course, death and decay is an important part of this process. Before we close this module, we just want to mention that humans have impacted the carbon cycle. We have increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by clearing trees that would otherwise undergo photosynthesis and sequester carbon in the form of cellulose and other molecules inside the trees' bodies. And we've also burned fossil fuels that have stored carbon for millions and millions of years. About 300 million years ago was a Carboniferous period, and that was kind of the peak of formation of fossil fuels. Burning wood as well can lead to increased releasing of carbon dioxide. And the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has the potential to change our Earth in a fundamental way. And so this rapid release of fossil fuels can rightly be looked upon as a gift from nature, but they also have been seen in the way that we've used them to pose a threat to the well-being of nature. We call this process of releasing these carbon dioxide and other such gases is called human-caused global warming, and it's caused by something called the greenhouse effect. And we'll learn about that in just a little bit, but one more slide first, and then we'll have the other module. And that is I want to remind you that carbon dioxide itself is a greenhouse gas, as is water vapor. And both these gases, if they increase in concentration in the atmosphere of the Earth, they give the atmosphere of the Earth then a greater heat trapping capacity, and that's where we can have a warming effect. Now, I could ask you, should we remove all the greenhouse gases in from the planet? And I hope you would realize that just because a lot is bad doesn't mean we should have none, because in fact, the greenhouse gases are critically important to keeping the Earth in a habitable zone of temperature. If we took all of the greenhouse gases away, Earth would be so frigidly cold that life would hardly be possible. Certainly not anywhere near the richness of life that the Earth currently supports. Some greenhouse gases are natural and needed for life, but too many may cause global warming. And of course, the activity of people do have this effect on greenhouse gases. And so we'll continue that in our next module, and that will conclude this module.